Test one, test one. You guys ready to start? Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Rick Gordon. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Tidal Cyber. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody a little bit about threat-informed defense. What I hope to do is tell you a little bit about what threat-informed defense is, how it helps you actually defend your infrastructure better and save money at the same time. Well, okay. Quickly, a little bit about me. So I've been in the industry about 25 years. It's hard to believe that it's gone that quickly. I did my first security startup in 1999. It was an email security gateway. Have been involved as a security innovator and investor on many security companies that have really, I think, changed the industry in profound ways. Most of those companies were founded by innovators, maybe that were a lot like you guys, security operators that were really trying to solve a vexing problem that they had in their daily lives, but didn't have the tools that they needed to actually address those specific needs. Threat-informed defense is something that came out of that kind of innovation. All three co-founders, we were all working together at MITRE in the area of threat-informed defense, trying to solve this really basic security problem, answer a basic security question that we just didn't have the tools to be able to answer. So we actually invented this approach called threat-informed defense that actually makes it easy to answer this super basic security question that people have a lot of difficulty with. The question's simple. It's, can we defend our assets and infrastructure against X? X could be an adversary group. Specifically, it should be the tactics and techniques that the adversaries who are attacking our kinds of business are actually using. It is a basic security question, whether you're talking about physical security or whether you're talking about cybersecurity. It connotes an understanding of what's the threat profile, so what's the model threat that we're trying to defend against, and what are the defenses that we've designed against those techniques or the tradecraft that the adversaries are using, and then an understanding of whether or not what we've done is enough, and if not, what do we do about it? It is at the core of what we do as security professionals, and it is something that we get asked all the time. This is something that our employers pay us to do, begs the question, why are we so bad at answering it? There's a lot to unpack in that question, but this was the essential question that we were really trying to understand. Here's a challenge for you. If any of you manage security teams, I'd encourage you to go back and ask them this question on Monday. Can our defenses as deployed and configured in our environment today effectively defend us against, pick one, Akira, pretty active ransomware group, active in this industry? If they come back with an answer in the next 24 hours, I will bet you 10 to 1 odds they're guessing. Because to answer that question is really difficult. There's a lot to unpack to answer it in an analytically rigorous way. At the core of the question, or core of answering the question, is this. You need to understand what the view of residual risk is at a low enough level of abstraction to prescribe something that actually mitigates the risk associated with whatever that thing is. So in general, this requires an organization to be able to know who's attacking them with what, and whether or not the tools that they've deployed in their environment are effectively defending against those things at a low enough level of abstraction to be accurate. So a lot to understand, and it's difficult. It's just a difficult question to answer because there's a lot of things to do in order to be able to answer it. On the threat intelligence side, let's just start with this. I've got to understand whether or not Akira even cares about my kind of business. I have to understand which behaviors and which techniques and sub-techniques Akira might even be using today. I need to understand if that intelligence is, or the behaviors described specifically enough that I can actually even develop a defensive capability against. And I need to understand of those behaviors, and there are 650 of them to choose from, of those behaviors, which ones represent higher levels of risk to my business versus others. On the defensive intelligence side, it's actually even more complicated. I need to understand which of those techniques my security products are actually defending. Given the complexity and opacity of a lot of our tools, it is incredibly difficult, probably impossible for most of our teams to really understand, what are my products in the aggregate actually effectively defending against. Similarly, we need to know whether or not those things are even configured on. Time and time again, we run across customers that think that they've cranked up whatever their EDR is. And I'll tell you a case study in a minute, and they're disappointed when we very quickly can show them, hey, there are like 40 things you need to do against these techniques that are actually being used by Akira and everybody else. They don't know how effective those capabilities are. I think, unfortunately, the vendor community would have you believe that if they have one defensive capability in a particular technique, that's the equivalent of having 100% risk reduction in that technique. It isn't like that. It doesn't work that way. There's a lot of probability, a lot of variance within the techniques that the adversaries use, and you need to know that you need to stack multiple defensive capabilities on a technique-by-technique basis to feel confident that you've effectively mitigated the risk within that particular adversary behavior. And then similarly, you need to know what the incremental impact is of a particular capability. As you start to stack defensive capabilities in against techniques one by one, you do incrementally, you do decrease the risk of the adversary can actually affect the technique. But it's marginally so. Every time you're adding a specific capability, the impact in risk reduction is actually reduced. At some point, it becomes a diminishing return. So you start to have some expensive products that you're layering into your security stack that has, it's highly redundant. And at some point where you might be getting like 2% in improvement in risk reduction for $1 million, that bang may not be worth it for the buck. Perhaps you don't spend the money on that and you find other creative ways to find point solutions that actually effectively reduce the risk in a way that makes better sense for you. Perhaps you drive that savings to the bottom line, and perhaps you reallocate it to the other techniques that are exhibiting higher levels of residual risk. The answer to the question is incredibly time-consuming. This is a sort of an example that, and actually I would say the day in the life of an analyst, but it's more like the month in the life of an analyst. If you ask the question to an analyst, can we defend against Akira? This is what they should do. They should answer the question, which technique even matters? That starts with understanding, okay, well, does Akira attack companies like me? What techniques do they use? How relatively impactful are those techniques to me? Like how much risk each one applies to us? And then when they have a sense of which techniques matter most, by the way, that to be able to even do that part, to get past step one, your analyst has to have access to that data. If they don't have access to CTI, you're never even going to get past the first step. The second step is a little more challenging, which is what techniques do my tools defend against? An example would be your EDR does hundreds of things. You have to know which technique or techniques, in most cases, each capability impacts multiple techniques. It impacts them differently. Each unique way that it impacts those techniques has a different level of risk reduction that you should assume it's applying. But if you can get past that, it's typically a week of work, maybe 2 weeks of work for an analyst. For an EDR, it's probably even more work to really unpack what it does and which behaviors are being covered. The next step is actually the easiest part. When you have a view of risk and you have a view of risk reductions, you can get a great sense on a technique-by-technique basis what your residual risk is. But then it begs the question, now I know I have gaps, what do I do about that, right? And so what the analyst would then need to do is, okay, well, I have these 850 capabilities in my EDR. 200 of them are dormant, meaning I haven't turned the policy settings on so that they're being used. Which ones do I need to turn on? And so the analyst then has to examine, okay, well, I have 20 tools, they each have that many things to do. Which of those things reduces residual risk in my environment by the greatest amount? So to be analytically accurate, you rebuild the coverage map that many times. That's time-consuming, tedious, and practically impossible. Here's why. If you examine how much it costs to answer that question each time you answer it, on average, it's somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million a year to be able to answer this question as often as it's asked. Most of our companies don't have that kind of money. And so what do we do? When we know the CEO is going to ask us the question or the CIO is going to ask us the question because it's a basic security question, we guess. We mostly guess. We give an answer. It's usually might be in the ballpark, probably specifically not right. But we also know that our bosses aren't going to be able to understand this environment well enough, so we always get away with it. Not everybody guesses. There are, top 1% of organizations actually do this kind of analysis. I've got several customers, especially in the financial services sector, which have significant amount of capital to spend, that they do this analysis. One large financial services customer actually does it. They do it manually. They do it every year. It takes them 6 months to do it because of the rate at which the adversaries evolve and because of the rate at which your security products evolve. It's clearly out of date as soon as it's delivered. It does give them valuable insight, but it's not what it could be for them. And that costs them millions of dollars a year to do every year, right? Not something most of us can afford. 99% of the rest of us, we guess. We give an answer, we say it with a lot of authority because we know that our bosses probably don't know, and we get away with it. You don't have to guess anymore. That's the whole point of threat-informed defense. It's really intended to make it super easy for you to know which techniques matter at any given point in time without having to make a significant investment in a threat intelligence organization. It's intended to help you identify automatically where your coverage gaps are so that you know what you need to focus on. It helps you understand, even answer the question, like what are the things that I can do next with the tools that I've already paid for that will actually fill those gaps for me today. It's difficult to do if you don't know that you have the exposure and you don't know the capabilities of the tools that you have. And then finally, it's organic. So as the threat intelligence evolves, so does your perspective on risk. As defensive capabilities evolve, so does your perspective on residual risk. The priorities change each time the status quo changes. Here's how it works. It starts by structuring threat intelligence and defensive intelligence in exactly the same structure that's enumerated by MITRE ATT&CK. Tactics, techniques, and procedures. On the threat intelligence side, what we do is we decompose group software and campaigns into the component techniques. We know who is attacking whom with what. So depending on the kind of company you are and where you are, healthcare company in Michigan. Right? We know who the actors are that you would need to worry about. We know which behaviors they use, and we know which behaviors are more impactful than other behaviors, giving you an automated view. It's a threat profile that basically says, this is where the risk is the highest. This is where the risk is the lowest. These other techniques, don't even worry about them because the adversaries you care about have not been known to use them. Don't focus on those things. We do something really similarly on the defensive intelligence side, but instead of decomposing group software and campaigns, what you do is you decompose your tools. You break CrowdStrike into 800 plus defensive capabilities. You know which techniques those defensive capabilities impact. You know the nature of the defense. You know generally what the estimate is for risk reduction for that. You do that for every tool in the stack, and then you stack them on a technique by technique basis, giving you a good view of what your defensive stack looks like. You bring those two things together into a coverage map, and it will show you which techniques you even need to worry about, how much risk each of them represents, how much of that risk you've mitigated effectively, and where you still have work to do. There are always opportunities for improvement, but you always want to focus on the techniques that are demonstrating the greatest levels of residual risk. I don't know a CISO that has enough money or enough people, and so you need to make these really sound decisions in how you're allocating those resources. I can't think of a better way to do it than aligning it against the things that have the highest levels of residual risk, but you can't do it if you can't see it. It's one thing to know that you have a high level of residual risk in a particular area. It's another thing to actually know what to do about it. I saw a gentleman nodding in the back. every customer that we have has hundreds of capabilities that are dormant in their environment. They just didn't know it. It's probably an indictment on the administrative interfaces that our industry is pushing into our tools, but people just don't know how to relate policy settings to coverage and coverage to risk. So in this case, what the platform or what a platform would do is then essentially rebuild that coverage map hundreds of times. It's so efficient, you could do it every 5 minutes. So if anything changes in the threat environment, if anything changes in the defense environment, not only does the base coverage map change, your risk went up here. In these 6 techniques, the recommendations reshuffle based on the impact that each of these dormant capabilities can do. So if you have 200 dormant capabilities, a platform will recalculate 200 coverage maps for you and tell you, of those capabilities that you already own, which ones give you the biggest bang for the buck right now. Here's what a threat profile looks like. You notice across the top all 14 tactics that are enumerated by the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base. Each of those boxes is an indicator of a technique or a sub-technique. In this case, this is untreated, so this is just the threat profile. How threaty is each of these particular techniques that the adversaries who are attacking you are actually using? A defensive stack. There are lots of ways that you can show a defensive stack. This one's my favorite, but it helps you understand these are the tools in my stack. These are the nature of the defenses that they're offering in your environment, and then capability utilization is like a crowd pleaser. It helps you understand like how much juice you have left in that orange that's super expensive that you can squeeze out, but you just didn't know about it. Across the board, we find customers have spent money on capabilities and just didn't know they needed to turn them on. You put those two things together, let me take a step back. So this is what it looked like untreated. This is the credit that you're getting from the tools that you've invested. So you are definitely getting value out of the platforms that you've employed in your environment. You've seen a lot of reds turn. There's only one red in this one. So a lot of reds turn to orange, a lot of orange turn to yellow, a lot of yellow turn to green. You don't want to focus on the green. You've done enough there. You need to focus clearly on the red. It's super easy in a platform like this to just drill into the red and say, okay, what do I have? What do I have that actually ameliorates the risk from that particular technique? There are just a little more complicated because there's so many of them. It's hard to know where to start. So a more logical approach is to ask the question a little bit differently and just say, of the things that I have, what reduces residual risk by the greatest amount? That's what happens. It looks like this. It is a list of defensive capabilities that you own that you have not turned on in your environment in order of impact. So naturally, you would start with the thing that's most impactful and evaluate whether or not that's a suitable one for you. Because the data is structured in software, there's a lot of other insights you can get in this. Not only can you get a good sense of how well we're defending against a group of adversaries, but you can clearly get a good insight into how well we're defending against each of the adversaries. I don't know if you can see it from the back, but in this case, we're not doing as well against Black Basta as we are against APT38. So it's super useful to then dig into the Black Basta and say, okay, what techniques does it use, and how do I improve my security posture against those specific techniques? What can I turn on it with what I own to improve that position? Similarly, for storytelling, if any of you are CISOs or security leaders and you have to, demonstrate what the impact of that last $1 million you got in your budget increase, it's a great way to do it because the platform stores all the data. You can then turn around and say, okay, this is where we were at this point last year. The adversaries ramped up in these particular capabilities, or maybe new adversaries started focusing on our business. Our risk went up. We kept pace, closed the gap on them by the investments that you gave us last year, and this is the return that you got. So 3 years ago, most of this was theory. When we left MITRE, we knew that we could build this capability, had a lot of collaboration with the vendor community to do it. But we really hadn't demonstrated it yet. It's not theory anymore. We've got lots of case examples of profound efficiency gains that we've been able to deliver to customers. But in this case, here's one, or other two I'll share with you. This one is was actually a controlled case study that was a defense or detection engineering case, but I'll just sort of explain it to you really quickly. We went to a large insurance company, basically said to a senior detection engineer and then an analyst. The analyst had our platform, the senior detection engineer did not, and asked the question, can you defend against X? let's pretend it was Akira, right? So within 6 hours, the senior analyst actually spent most of the time trying to figure out what it is they had in their environment. To his credit, was able to find one gap and then made one recommendation. The junior engineer, not a specialist, had 11 in 30 minutes. So it's easy math. It's 11 times the benefit in 1/12 of the time for a question that gets asked all the time, and it's so taxing, we can't answer it, but now you can. The other one was a SOC assessment, which is sort of, core competency for threat-informed defense. And this was the case of a manufacturing company had been breached. New CISO came in, brought in a new EDR, got breached again, actually, and then we came in to do the assessment, and he sort of said to me, Rick, candidly, I don't think you're going to find anything because we think we maxed this thing out. So we built the threat profile, we built the defensive stack, we plugged into the EDR, 42 things, like in the first 30 seconds of capabilities that he needed to turn on that he was not aware of. And, this is after thinking they really dug into this thing. It's not unusual to see that. So that's all I had prepared. But here's what I would say: if now that you can do this, now that you can answer that basic security question, the only question that I would have for you is, why would you keep guessing? So happy to take any questions if we have any time. I might have gone over. Yes, sir.
I get why.
Great question. It's actually, that's one of my advisors. That's his favorite question. I think it's a great question. The question was, why do I care about which threat actors are talking to me? If you can get to the view, like which techniques or which tradecraft I need to worry about, you don't need to know. And that's actually kind of the point of this. The problem is, threat intelligence infrastructure has been organized that way. And so if you look and see what CrowdStrike puts out or Intel 471 puts out, they're all sort of organized around who the actor is, and it's hyperbolic, but what they have for lunch, and you don't care. You don't care about the things. All you really care about is which technique they're using, how often they're using it, how good they are at it, and what the relative level of impact that technique is. And if you can get to that view, that's what matters most. The reason we care about who the actor is that they're threat objects. And our design criteria was, okay, let's allow our customers to use the threat intelligence that they're most comfortable with. And so as long as they have the object and it's structured, we'll use that. If not, then we'll use our own threat intelligence in it. But almost all of them organize around who the actors are. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay. Any other questions? I'm out of time. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.